What's up, my Schwifties? I hope you're excited, because today we're gonna do something that they said was impossible. Something that they said couldn't and shouldn't be attempted. What we're gonna do is like a speed run of Game of Thrones. We're going to explain the plot, characters, themes of Game of Thrones in order, episode by episode, quickly, swiftly, with no tangents or interruptions. We're trying to take this as like a speed run. You guys familiar with the concept of speed running a video game? It's all about achieving like the optimal, most efficient route, trying to minimize the time, explaining the whole. We haven't started yet because that was a tangent, but we're going to start the time in a moment, and we're going to explain, recap, summarize Game of Thrones. So, like, buckle up, like, get your safety vests and helmets on. This is going to be intense. I don't know how far we're going to get through this. Maybe we'll do the first season. Maybe we'll do 2 seasons. Maybe we'll do the whole thing. This could get crazy. This might be the best, like, online entertainment you've ever seen. This might be a fucking garbage fire car crash. But I'm excited. Let's go. Starting. Now, so Game of Thrones opens with these 3 fellows, these 3 fine gentlemen, Will, Waymar, and Garrod. These are men of the Night's Watch, rangers who are sworn to defend the southern realms from the wildlings beyond. Free folk for the polite term. The Wall is this great magical structure that separates the south from the north and the wildlings and the Boogans and the Grumpkins beyond. And so these 3 gentlemen, they go beyond the Wall, as rangers do. That's their job, and they go out into the haunted forest, which is beyond the Wall, and their goal is to track down some wildlings. But they find the wildlings in a state that they do not expect to find them. They're all corpsed up. See, they're all corpsey. They're dead, and they're arranged in this mysterious symbol, this pattern, this theta or phi shape. Mysterious, but that's not the most pressing concern. The most pressing concern is that the wildlings are dead. What's going on? And so there's a bit of a conversation among these 3 fellas about how to proceed with this situation. It doesn't really matter because Waymar gets White Walkered. You see that fella there? They're called White Shadows in the books. That's more of a black shadow, but the color's not important. He's a Boogan. He's a baddie. The prop design of the White Walker a bit ugly at first, but don't worry. There's another kind as well. All right, this is important. There's 2 different kinds of Boogans. This is a White Walker. He's an icy demon fellow, and this is a white, which is a zombie. It's hard to explain because of what's called a homonym. So here's something I prepared earlier. White, spelled W-I-G-H-T, okay? That's different. How do you make it? It's not the same as a White Walker, okay? All right, we're going to be using some MS Paint teaching tools today, okay? Like Professor Schwift in the building. All right, so that's a white, that's a zombie, that's different to the icy White Walkers, but we'll work that out. And the White Walker, it comes and it beheads Garrod. And this fella here, Will, he's fucking spooping his pants at how horrifying this whole thing is. It's crazy. The White Walker throws Will's friend's head at his feet, and it's like, oh my fucking gosh, this is hectic. So Will flees. He runs. Oh, well, except we go dun 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 dun, like the intro plays then for the first time. Very exciting. Welcome, Udvar. We have not been going long. You've just missed the opening scene, but we're going at a crazy pace. And we got Will. He comes south and he gets captured by these gentlemen who are soldiers for House Stark. The North. This region is ruled by a noble family called the Starks. These are some of their employees. And so this is the North. Welcome to Winterfell. This is the castle that's ruled by the Starks, and Will gets captured. And here are some of the strapping young gentlemen who inhabit Winterfell. So we've got Bran Stark, Branno. He's got a bow, good on the archery. That's Jon Snow. He's a bastard. We like him. That's Robb. He's the golden boy. And this is the family all hanging out at Winterfell. This is a peaceful time. This is in the story circle of what's his name, the crossing the threshold, Joseph Campbell. This is the beginning of that story. These are our heroes in their place of like comfort, and we got John advising Bran here, happy little family. But there is a bit of tension, isn't there? Because Sansa here, she like fits the feminine role that she's expected to play in a medieval society, which is what this is. But Arya, the other Stark daughter, does not fit. Her stitches are crooked when they're doing all this embroidery, and so Arya doesn't fit into the role she's expected to play. Catelyn Stark and Ned Stark are the loving parents. They're both great. We like them. This is Rickon. You probably don't even recognize Rickon. Everyone forgets about Rickon, but he's like low-key the coolest Stark. He has this whole unicorn thing going on, but we'll get to that. So Arya breaks out of the role she's expected to play. She stops with the needling and the stitching, and she instead does some archery, which is the kind of needling she prefers. So she's a tomboy who's rebelling against society's expectations. We got this fella, Roderick Castle. Good bloke. House Castle, very underappreciated. There are like a lot of Cassells who are great. There's Jory, there's Beth. Great family, good blokes. Theon, more complicated bloke. He doesn't quite fit into this whole melange. Is that how to use that word? Of House Stark. He doesn't quite fit in because he's not a Stark. He's a Greyjoy. He comes from the Iron Islands, which is somewhere else. Someone in the chat, Kathy, says that you've only got audio, no visuals. There should be visuals. Confirm that you all can see that. Catelyn doesn't like Jon. Catelyn Stark here doesn't like Jon because Jon is a bastard. All these other kids are the children of Catelyn, but Jon is not. Jon is believed to be the bastard son of Eddard Stark. So Eddard and some other woman had Jon, the other woman not being Cat, so she's upset about that. But the thing is, we later find out that Jon isn't the son of Ned Stark. It's a whole other thing. We'll get to that. And then so the Stark boys, because, gendered society, go out to do what boys do, which is cut off the heads of other boys. Welcome to Game of Thrones, because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of boys cutting off heads. And so what's happening is that Will is being executed because he deserted the Night's Watch. He ran away from the spoopy White Walker experience that he was having. And so we have Bran and Jon watching. Bran's very young. Catelyn didn't want him to come out and see this because Bran is like too young to see executions, but Ned's like, nonsense, he's old enough. And so yeah, Will is like, hey, by the way, maybe you should like investigate this like spooky ice demon situation. I think that might be a concern later on. And Ned is like, nah, don't worry, mate. It'll be fine. We don't need to worry about White Walkers. And so Will was like the most correct person in this entire fucking series. Roderick Cassell being a G. Jory Cassell, he's the junior Cassell. He's also great. He dies. So does Roderick. So does him. A lot of people die, but don't worry about it. So Ned is very stoic. He represents honor. He represents integrity. He represents doing the right thing by the moral code. And as we kind of learned, Game of Thrones is all about subverting and undermining the restrictions of that limited, rigid moral code. People who are not willing to compromise morally or otherwise tend to die in this particular program. And so Jon says, "Oh, Bran, make sure you watch the execution happen." Bran watches. Bran does a lot of watching in this series. Bran becomes a tree man who's psychic and sees everything. So that's sort of foreshadowing that. Ned pops off the bloke's head. First head pop of many. Well, not even the first head pop, because we also had this head pop back here as well. Are you liking the visuals? This is all live. This is, man, you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. It's great. It's amazing. Blow your mind. Anyway, so Bran talks to Ned, and Ned's like, yo, do you understand why I chop his head off? And he explains that the man who passes the sentence must swing the sword, which basically means that the Ned Stark believes that in order to have integrity and consistency and to command respect and to be a good, honest leader, you have to do your own dirty work. You can't rely on others. You have to be honest to yourself, and you have to look in a man's eyes before you cut off his head, because otherwise you might be misleading yourself. And that's something that we see later with Bobby B. Baratheon, the king at the moment. He's not someone who looks in someone's eyes. Robert Baratheon is constantly avoiding eye contact. He's got moral cataracts, as they say. So that's the whole tension that we see later on. But anyway, The Starks, the North, they've cut off Will's head, and then they find, whoa, what's this? Dinner? Breakfast? Is this no, it's a dead stag. And that's very ominous, because Robert Baratheon, who we're about to meet, Robert Baratheon, his house is represented by a stag. So this dead stag represents the death of Robert Baratheon, which is coming up. Spoilers. We also find a dead direwolf killed by the dead stag, and the direwolf is the symbol of House Stark, so this bodes very poorly for them. But also, see these little dogalogs, these little mini puppers, they are miniature direwolves. It's called young. You see, when animals give birth, they don't give... They have small sizes first. Okay, you guys know what babies are. You know what baby puppers are. Rob is looking concerned. But they find this dead direwolf, and they find the little baby direwolves, and they decide that the kiddos should keep the puppers. They take a Neopet. As you say. So Jon gets his Neopet, and he gets a shiny Pokemon because he's super important. Jon is a special snowflake, and he gets a special shiny Dogalog. So that's what happens, and it's great. And this, of course, it has the idea of like destiny and magic. This is showing us that these kids are no ordinary kids. They have special destinies, they have magical connections, and these wolves represent that. This is a fated magical event, possibly caused by Bloodraven. There's a gentleman we meet later called the Three-Eyed Raven, and the Three-Eyed Raven is maybe the person who sent these direwolves. At least in the books. It might be, it's simpler in the show. So anyway, so the kids get the wolves, and Ned, of course, says that, hey, by the way, you've got to look after these dogalogs yourself. You need to clip their little clippers. You need to wash their little feathers. You need to feed them the Mad Max cans of dog food, because he's all about that personal responsibility stuff. Okay, and then we go to a different location on the other side of the world. Well, other side of the continent. Well, halfway down the continent. Anyway, this place is King's Landing. This is the capital of Westeros. This is where the king lives. And we see a dead fella, and the dead fella is Jon Arryn, a gentleman called Jon Arryn, and he was a father figure to Ned, who is the father figure of the kids. There's a lot of sort of like generational stuff happening. There's older people dying, there's younger people. I mean, technically that's sort of always what happens, but there's a focus on like, the way legacy and values pass from one generation to another. That's a big concern of this story. So anyway, this fellow Jon Arryn has died, and so there's, funeral stuff happening. This is the Silent Sisters, which is a religious order who look after the dead, so they deal with dead bodies and things. They go around the battlefields after. Quite a cool costume they got here. And so the Silent Sisters are around, and we're introduced to extra characters, important characters, Cersei Lannister and Jaime Lannister. Everyone's favorite blonde incestuous siblings. One of many pairings of incestuous blonde siblings in this story. It's wild. But basically what we learn here is that Jaime is arrogant and fearless, and Cersei is power hungry and proud. That's kind of what we get from this scene. Then we go back to Winterfell. We're going so fast. And a raven arrives. In this world, ravens deliver messages. They have little bits of paper tied onto their little footsicles, and then the raven is trained to fly to a particular castle. Some ravens are trained to fly to multiple different castles, because it's like homing pigeons, right? Birds have that little internal radar, the little chicken navigation system. You know how birds can find their way back in the real world. Well, that's basically what this is sort of based on, the idea that birds can find places. Although there's a magical history to this in the Game of Thrones lore. Hairless Oyster in the chat says of Jaime, I wonder what this guy would do for love. This guy knows what's coming. We learn what he'd do for love. Anyway, ravens in the backstory in the books were apparently magically controlled and magically spoken to by the children of the forest, who were like these hippies who live in the woods and use magic powers. And have like really like dank green dreams, if you know what I mean. And so these ravens, originally in the history, in the lore, they actually spoke to give the messages. The raven said, yo, fucking Fred down the line says he'd like to order a pizza, please. And that's how the ravens communicated. But since magic is fading from the world, we now use paper messages. We've downgraded to emails. So that's another thing that's going on in this story, is that it's a passing from a magical era to a non-magical era. Or at least that's what has been happening, because what we see throughout the story is a return of magic. We see dragons being born again, an age for gods and heroes. So things get pretty wild. So anyway, we're back at Winterfell. See this particular woman there? One of the extras that they have at Winterfell, like all the time, is this lady carrying a big sheath of, like, I don't even know what that is. Is that wheat or just some kind of fucking fennel, some kind of fibrous? She just walks around carrying that hay, like, all the time in, like, multiple episodes this season. And it's really silly. Like, why have they got... Anyway, so we go to the Godswood in Winterfell, and this is a place with trees in it within the castle. Specifically, it has this weirwood tree, which is a white tree with red leaves. And this is associated with the religion of the old gods, who are like these nature gods, who we later find out are a psychic hive mind. We'll get back into that. And this fella, Ned Stark, is a believer in the old gods. So he comes here for coffee and contemplation in the mornings to have a think after he cuts off someone's head, and he cleans the blade. Interesting fact. So that blade with the blood on it, the blood is going down onto the ground into the earth beneath the weirwood tree. And there's a lot of history and lore about weirwoods receiving blood sacrifices. Back in the day, people would kill people at weirwoods to give their like essence and blood and life to the tree. And that's kind of symbolically what Ned Stark is doing here. He's actually giving blood to the tree, knowingly or not. So in some sense, he may be continuing the condition of the tradition of sacrifices to weirwood trees. And yes, we are talking fast because this is a speed run, guys. We're getting through season 1 as quickly as we can. Get excited. So Catelyn comes to Ned, and Catelyn is not a Stark. She's not a Northman. She doesn't believe in the old gods. She believes in the faith of the Seven, which is a more southern religion. It's basically equivalent to Catholicism. Because Catelyn married into the Stark family by marrying Ned. She's a little bit of an outsider in the Godswood, she says, and she delivers the bad news that Jon Arryn is dead. And that's really sad for Ned because Jon Arryn was a father figure to him. And then we get another scene of lots of abs, Jon, Theon, Robb getting haircuts, and apparently in the production of this episode, we had these actors trying really hard to like tense their abs to look sexy. I mean, look at Robb there. He's really going at it to try and look as attractive as possible, because what else are you going to do if you're going to be on an HBO TV show? You want to get sexy. And so these fellows are getting their haircuts in preparation for the arrival of Robert Baratheon, who is the king of Westeros, who is coming to Winterfell to visit his old friend Ned, and more, we'll see. So the North, the king comes up the road to say g'day to his mate Ned. We have Bran watching from above. That's what Bran does. He's the Watcher, which is a overrated song. Bran does some climbing because Bran loves climbing. And Catelyn says, Brano, you got to stop with climbing, mate, because you'll fall and hit your head. And Brano's like, I never fall. And that's foreshadowing for the falling that Bran will soon do. This is Maester Luwin. So in this world, maesters are an order of academics and scholars and monks who swear to, who swear away sex and swear away their names and swear away everything and become totally dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. And maesters serve lords all about Westeros and send the messages and stuff. And some people are a bit suspicious of the maesters' whole motivations and situations. But the maesters, well, this particular maester, Luwin, he's like a pretty good bloke. He genuinely cares about Bran and the other children at Winterfell. He's a good sort, but he does also represent skepticism against magic. Luwin doesn't believe in magic and the psychic powers that Bran later learns. So Luwin is an interesting figure. He's a good guy, but he also represents an ideology that's on the wane, and that's kind of why Luwin ends up dying. Arya Stark, our rebel, our tomboy, wears a great hat. I think that hat should make a comeback. It's a good one. I like how it's got little ear holes there so she can hear through. It's great, don't worry. But Arya is enjoying the spectacle of King Robert Baratheon arriving at Winterfell. And, you know, she's into adventure and she's into fighting as well. It's something that she increasingly gets interested in, which this helmet sort of alludes to. So the Stark family all line up to meet the king, Robert Baratheon. Hodor, gentle giant, only says Hodor over there. You'll notice that Jon Snow isn't included in this welcoming party because Jon is a bastard, and in this society, bastards are considered to be less than other people. And so he's hidden away, which is something that Jon resents. Sansa has a little smile here for Prince Joffrey, because Sansa hopes to marry Prince Joffrey and become queen. Ian in the chat says, how long is this recap going to be? Ian, I have no idea. We're just going to run until we run out of steam. I'm thinking maybe we'll get through season 1, but so far we're only halfway through episode 1, so we'll see how we go. This is a speed run, so no distractions. The Hound is one of the other great characters. He is a soldier of sorts in service of House Lannister, and he's someone who is angry at the world. He's hateful, he loves violence, but he's also got a softer side to him. We kind of learn that his anger and his hatred is really kind of a defense mechanism he uses to hide his insecurities and his fears, which is why it's so beautiful that he wears this helmet in the shape of a hound. His identity is armor, which is something that Tyrion later talks about. It's this idea of using an identity, a persona, an act to hide and protect your emotional vulnerabilities. And so that's kind of what we see with the Hound, with his humanity inside this ferocious shell, like a hermit crab. Let's all call Hound the hermit crab. This is Robert Baratheon. This is the king of Westeros, and he doesn't look all that impressive, does he? Compared to someone like, Jaime Lannister. Here's a handsome Prince Charming with a sword. He knows how to swing it. And in the books, Jon looks at Jaime and thinks this is what a king should look like. Robert Baratheon, on the other hand, is not what a king should look like. He's a bit old, he's a bit fat, he's a bit washed up, and that is something that Robert as a character represents. He's sort of not a successful king and not a successful man in many ways. So Robert embraces each of the Stark family, most of them, because Ned and Robert are good mates going way back. They actually fought together in a war to make Robert king. And we have Cersei Lannister. She's the queen. She's married to Robert while she's sneakily snoo-snooing her brother on the side. And so we have each of the Stark kids greeted. Robert asks Arya, "What's your name?" When Arya is later asked, "What's your name?" when she joins the Faceless Men. That's the whole thing. But yeah, don't worry about that. He meets everyone. We know Jaime. We know Cersei. Cersei says, let's go inside and whatever, the dead can wait. But Robert wants to go down to the crypts where the Winterfell people keep their dead people, dead Starks, because Robert wants to see Lyanna, which is the woman who he was in love with before he married Cersei, and Lyanna was Ned's sister. So we're down in the crypts, and Robert says, yo, Ned, my boy, since Jon Arryn died, I want you to be the Hand of the King, which is a position which basically means you're like the executive. You basically run the kingdom while the king eats, drinks, and whores his way to an early grave. That's what Robert wants Ned to do. Robert just wants to sort of fuck around and indulge himself hedonically, whereas Ned is a trustworthy guy with integrity and responsibility, and that's why Robert chooses Ned as the only person he trusts to take on this important job. Meanwhile, Jaime goes and visits a brothel to go see his brother Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion the Imp, who is the intelligent and witty, but also kind of wounded and sensitive because he's a dwarf and he's hated by his father Tywin and by his sister Cersei and by society at large for the crime of being a bit ugly. And Tyrion's persona, with some images that I don't think we can stream. Well, maybe this one. All right, close your eyes okay, that one's fine. So Tyrion is enjoying the company of a woman called Ros at the moment, because Tyrion is a big fan of prostitutes to fill his empty love hole. And Ros later becomes a pretty important character in like seasons 2-3. She finds ways to advance herself. But Tyrion is known for his lechery and for his lust and for his drinking, and he's sort of this party boy, although that does sort of decline later in the series. And in fact, I think it's sort of talked up a bit. I'm not sure if Tyrion is quite the drinker and womanizer that he claims to be, perhaps, because I think like the Hound, he's using his identity like armor. He's very sensitive about his appearance and about the way society treats him, and so he has like this careless persona of like, I'm just drinking and fucking, I don't care about what you think, when in fact Tyrion cares deeply about what everyone thinks. So we go back to the crypts, and Robert Baratheon is very sad looking at Lyanna Stark, the woman who he was in love with, who tragically died, giving birth to Jon, actually, as we later find out. So that's the whole thing. But Robert is very sad about Lyanna, and part of the reason why Cersei, Robert's wife, is so frustrated and angry at the world is that Robert never really loved Cersei. Robert only had eyes for this dead woman, Lyanna Stark. So we talk about Lyanna, and we also talk about how there are Targaryens out there. So the people who Robert and Ned fought back in the day in order to make Robert king were the Targaryens. So this is Daenerys Targaryen over here. And, Ned's saying, well, the Targaryens are dead because, Robert killed the main Targaryen, Rhaegar, but Rhaegar's sister, Daenerys, is still out there, and Rhaegar's brother, Viserys, is also out there. So now we move across to another continent to see this other family, the Targaryens. And the Targaryens are hanging out in the manse of Illyrio Merpatus, who is this gentleman, this corpulent, clever, Pentoshi cheesemonger. He's a merchant, and he's a man of complicated motivations, which isn't really relevant in the TV show. It's a whole thing in the books, but in the show, he's just sort of a fat man who arranges a marriage between Daenerys and this fellow, Drogo, and he's a Dothraki guy. And the Dothraki are a people who are sort of based on the Mongolian horse lords and the people of the steppes of the wherever, and they are nomadic and they ride around attacking places and stealing stuff, and they don't farm, they just take shit, and Viserys has lined up Daenerys to be taken by Drogo because Viserys, his plan is to use Drogo's Dothraki army to invade Westeros and reclaim the throne, because Viserys is part of the Targaryen family who originally ruled Westeros before Robert Baratheon and Ned took it away from them. And the reason they did that, of course, was that Aerys, the Targaryen king, was a madman. Floop is a madman, help us, save us, and that's why Robert and Ned kicked him out and made Robert king. Daenerys gets in a really hot bath, and it's not just hot because she's in a bomb chico. No, and Daenerys is heat resistant. In fact, in the show, Daenerys is straight up fireproof. Daenerys cannot be burned by anything in the show, which is part of her sort of mystical connection to magic and destiny and Azor Ahai. A little bit like how the Stark kids get the direwolves. Daenerys has her heat resistance thing, but she later gets an even more important token of her magical power. So Viserys and Daenerys have a really fucked up relationship because Daenerys is just sort of this meek, passive girl who is controlled and abused by her brother. He physically and psychologically hurts her, but he is all she's had for all these years. She's had to rely on him for everything, and it's this fucked up relationship. And he decides to give her to Drogo via Illyrio. So Daenerys is terrified by the whole thing, as you would be, and then Viserys and Illyrio discuss their plans to take over Westeros using Drogo's army, and we learn that Viserys is a fucking idiot. Like, Viserys thinks he can take on anything, and he's very arrogant, and he's delusional, because he was brought up in a situation of thinking he was going to have all this power, but then when Robert Baratheon and Ned took over, he was kicked out, he became the beggar king, he had nothing, and the only thing that kept him alive through those difficult circumstances was the conviction that he would reclaim his birthright and become king. So if for nothing else, I think we have to admire Viserys for his persistence, his tenacity, his strength of will. Viserys certainly has those qualities, but unfortunately he's also a fucking awful human being. He tells Daenerys, hey Daenerys, I would have you raped by all of the Dothraki and all of their horses if it got me my throne. So Viserys is not a character who we sympathize with because he's crazy and delusional and cruel and most certainly should not be the king of Westeros. So then we have a conversation between Catelyn and her daughter Sansa. We don't get a lot of that in the books, but it happens in the show. And they're talking about how Sansa wants to be queen. She wants to marry Prince Joffrey because Sansa believes in songs and dreams and this like fantasy of being the perfect archetypical beautiful lady and having all these wonderful things happen and hanging out with other beautiful ladies and eating grapes off the bellies of, like those sushi platters where you eat sushi off a woman. Like Sansa sort of wants like the European medieval equivalent of All right, bad metaphor. But Sansa wants to be an aristocrat and a lady, and to be surrounded by finery and luxury, and to have status and power and beautiful, pretty, exciting things and tournaments and lemon cakes. That's what Sansa wants to believe in, that dream. And Sansa does not want her dreams to be memes. She wants to marry Prince Joffrey, become queen. That's what she wants. God, that was not concise. And Catelyn has mixed feelings about that whole thing, as she should, because, as it turns out, those dreams do not go well for Sansa. In fact, they become #nightmares. And Catelyn is very protective of her children to the very end. This fellow, Benjen Stark, gets back from the wall. So Benjen is the brother of Ned Stark and the uncle of the Stark kids. And Benjen is sort of a role model and a father figure to Jon. And Benjen works at the Night's Watch, which is with, Garrett and Waymar and Will and those fellows we saw before. He's a man of the Night's Watch. He defends the realms. And so they have a nice conversation. And Jon declares that he wants to join the Night's Watch because, he admires Benjen and he feels like he doesn't have a place at Winterfell. He doesn't fit in, and he wants a home and a purpose in life. And so he's like, well, I'll be like my Uncle Ben, and I'll great power, great responsibility, and I'll join the Night's Watch. And Benjen's like, you actually probably shouldn't. If you knew what it meant to be a man of the Night's Watch, you wouldn't want to be a man of the Night's Watch, because Night's Watchmen don't get to have kids, they don't get to have wives or crowns or lands. They dedicate their lives entirely to the cause. Like a lot of institutions in Westeros, they're really big on making oaths and celibacy and stuff, which really is not a great model for institutions to run on, as we are learning. And then, so Jon's a bit frustrated by Benjen saying, no, don't be in the Night's Watch, and then Jon meets Tyrion Lannister. And at first, Jon is not a fan of Tyrion because Tyrion calls him a bastard, which he is, but Tyrion then explains his philosophy. He's like, yo, I actually understand your predicament because you are a bastard, I'm a dwarf, we are both outcasts from society in different ways, and my suggestion is that you wear your identity like armor. That's what Tyrion does with his lechery and his sarcasm and his wit. He's creating these smoke screens and these armors and these colorful distractions to prevent his own sensitivities being hurt. You know how a squid ejects ink and then squiggles away? That's sort of the equivalent of what Tyrion's doing with all his wit and his sarcasm and his stuff. He just throws it up there to defend himself from criticism and from what really hurts him. And so Tyrion's suggesting that Jon does the same. So Jon gets that advice from the drunk dwarf, and then he goes back to training, hitting things with swords, which later becomes very important for Jon. We have a conversation between Ned and his brother Benjen, and they mention White Walkers, but they're sort of like, yeah, White Walkers aren't real, don't worry about it. And then we have Robert Baratheon openly finagling another woman at this feast while Cersei Lannister looks on. So Cersei Lannister has had to put up with years of Robert's open infidelities and disrespect and bullshit, and she's had to put up with it, and she's had no outlet for her rage and her frustration. As she later says, what of my wrath, Ned Stark? Cersei has a lot of resentments boiling up in her, which only find expression in the later seasons in the form of wildfire explosions. So we got Sansa hanging out with Jane Poole, who's a non-character in the show, and Sansa comes and meets the Queen, Cersei, and she's all excited to be, woohoo, this is what I want to be. I want to be a beautiful aristocrat like Cersei. And then right away, Cersei sort of pisses on that parade by saying, oh, have you bled yet? Because this is a society where reproductive function is central to the value of a woman and defines her life. And that later becomes an issue for Sansa. And, Catelyn is trying to be encouraging and helpful, but Catelyn also gets worried because she realizes that Cersei is going to take Sansa away from her. If Sansa fulfills her dream of becoming a highborn aristocratic lady queen in the south, that'll mean that Catelyn will have to give up her little girl, which is something that all mothers face to some extent, I would think. The idea that your children are growing up and they're growing away from you, which is something that Catelyn has to grapple with because she's also got this deep love for her children and a desire to protect them. This is Joffrey, the biggest, douchiest little turd prince in the castle. We don't like him, but Sansa really wants to marry him because he's like, well, he's so pretty and he'll make me queen. But no, it gets worse. Jamie Lannister confronts Ned and says like, yo, I'm a tough guy, you're a tough guy. That means we gotta fight. Because Jamie's itching for a fight. He's an aggressive man. He's a renowned warrior, and Ned is also pretty well respected as a warrior. So Jamie would like to have a go if you think you're hard enough. Then we have this scene with Ned and Catelyn, the couple, the marriage, the bedrock of House Stark. It was an arranged marriage. It wasn't a marriage they chose, but they love each other deeply, and they've got a strong relationship. And then Catelyn receives a letter from House Arryn. So Lysa Arryn, Lysa Tully, who married Jon Arryn, so she's an Arryn now, but Lysa is Catelyn's sister. And so Catelyn gets a letter from her sister, and it says, yo, the Lannisters killed my husband, Jon Arryn. That fellow who was dead before, apparently he was killed by the Lannisters. And we later find out that that's a lie. But in the moment, Catelyn becomes very concerned about the Lannisters, and she's like, well, this seems like all the more reason for Ned to accept Robert's offer and to go south and be the Hand of the King and work out what the fuck's going on. In the books, it's the other way around. Or is it the other way around between the books and the show? Whatever. The point is that Ned feels torn. Because on the one side, he wants to stay in the north, and he wants to be with his family, and he wants to be in the place that he feels connected to culturally and religiously through the old gods and the weirwood. Ned feels that he should stay in the north. But at the same time, he has this obligation to his friend Robert. He has this concern about this possible threat by the Lannisters on the lives of his friend Jon Arryn. There's all these competing things pulling Ned in a lot of different directions. And the author, George Martin of the book series, he says that all stories are about the human heart in conflict with itself. And so Ned's heart is very much in conflict at this moment, but he does eventually decide to go south with his friend Robert to be Hand of the King. And then we have a wedding. And weddings are always interesting, momentous occasions in Game of Thrones. In this case, it's the wedding of Khal Drogo with Daenerys. And Daenerys is terrified by the whole thing. She's being thrown into the deep end. Like, she's put into this whole cultural situation that is totally alien to her. She doesn't understand the language. She doesn't know the customs. There are people fighting and fucking in front of her because that's how the Dothraki party. So this is a very, like, intimidating, terrifying situation for Daenerys to be in. And Viserys is just like, Lamal, that's kind of funny. My sister is gonna go be a barbarian's wife, and he's just sort of laughing and, oh, this is fine. I'm getting my army. So he's selfish and unsympathetic, and sort of so is Illyrio Mopatis, but again, he's not really important in the show. And so Drogo and Daenerys are married, and then we meet another fella by the name of Jorah Mormont, Sir Friendzone himself. He brings some books of Westerosi stuff to Daenerys, but Jorah just comes and says, like, yo, I was in the area, I don't really know you, but I'm gate-crashing your wedding, and I'm just going to help you and be your best friend for the next few seasons. And that's what Jorah does. But we also learn that Jorah has a complicated... All right, we'll get into it. But she meets Jorah, and Daenerys also, importantly, gets dragon eggs. So in the same way that the Stark kids got those doggo wolfos, Daenerys gets some little kinder surprises that contain some dinosaurs, and that's very exciting. At the moment, we're told that, like, magic is dormant in the world. There are no dragons, and so these eggs are just stone. So, like, don't expect them to hatch, don't expect them to do anything, but the magic's returning, so they will hatch eventually. So Daenerys gets these sort of mysterious, mystical objects, and she's all intrigued by the whole thing. And then Drogo, Daenerys' new husband, comes up with this pretty white horse, which is, like, practically a character in its own in the books, but the horse is not so important in the show. And there's this moment where Daenerys is taken away by her new husband, and it's this scary crossing of a threshold. What new life is Daenerys stepping into? And Viserys, with his most shit-eating of smiles, says, oh, make him happy, because, of course, in these arranged marriages, women have to have sex with their husbands, whether they like it or not, because women have no sexual agency in this world, and that's terrifying for Daenerys. And she looks out at the sunset like Luke Skywalker, dreaming of something better, and then her husband comes along along and rapes her. In the books, it's not rape, but there is rape later. It's, I don't know, kind of fraught. But the point is that this relationship in the show starts badly, and Daenerys is in a bad situation. And Drogo is just kind of inscrutable. He hasn't got language that Daenerys has. They can't communicate, but that changes and softens later. So Ned goes south with Robert Baratheon to be the Hand of the King. The kids say goodbye to their father. Bran watches. He does so much watching. Call him Uatau. Who's the fella in DC that does all that watching? That's what Bran's like. And then Bran does some more climbing. If only he'd listened to his mother. And someone in the chat just said, yeah, okay, that was a joke. All right, anyway. So Bran does some climbing, and then he leaves his doggo behind. Look how cute the little pupagon is. Look at that little pup. Look at the ears. Imagine if you had ears like that. That's like 720-degree hearing. Anyway, so Bran climbs up the tower and he's like, oh, what is going on here? What kind of shenanigans am I sticking my head into? And Bran sees, okay, is there a picture I can click on here? I think that one's pretty safe. Jaime and Cersei. They're having a good old incestuous tangle, a good old tumble, an incestuous smang. They're rolling in they're just bumping pretties, not uglies, because they are pretty sexy people, canonically, at least. And so they're having a good old brother-sister McLovin situation, which is not public knowledge. We're not meant to know about that, the whole incest, because technically speaking, queens are not meant to fuck their brothers. So Jaime says, Brano, concern, what with the witnessing our crime against the crown and decency. So I'm gonna have to give you a little push, little defenestration. Every episode should end with a good old defenestration, and that's what happens here. Bran falls from the tower, and Jaime says, with loathing, the things I do for love. So Jaime is a villain at the start of the series. He's someone who's willing to kill to protect his relationship with Cersei. Hang on, does that make you a villain? Being willing to kill to protect the person you love? Maybe it's not. Here's another whole moral conundrum for you. Is it wrong to want to kill for the person you love? Jaime's certainly a bit rough now, but we like him more later on. And that was the end of episode 1. Okay, so this was a speed run. Someone says the chat is distracting, so we'll make the chat smaller. How about we do that? How about we do that? Maybe the chat doesn't need to be there at all. I don't know. I just don't want to get copyright striked. We just got to cover it just in case. All right, so should we do another episode? Guys, should we do another episode? Should we continue this momentum? We've done episode 1. Should we go into episode 2? Yes, we will. We're only slightly ahead of the actual speed of actually just watching the show yourself. But I don't know. Maybe we'll speed up now that we've got this basic context. We're still going. All right, more episodes. It's unanimous. Let's do it. Episode 2. So we start on the Dothraki Sea. This is the plain. This is the place where the Dothraki hang around and do their nomadic nomadery. That's where they do their shit. And Daenerys Targaryen is a bit uncomfortable with this whole situation, as you would be. She's in this unfamiliar culture, and she is not fond of this man who she is expected to be the wife of. So Daenerys is having a rough time. In the Dothraki Sea, we see this whole culture that's going on. And Jorah talks to Viserys, and Viserys, we learn a little bit about the history of Jorah Mormont, because Jorah was a lord in Westeros on a place called Bear Isle for House Mormont, but he was disgraced when he sold slaves, which is illegal, which he did to try and fund his wife's expensive tastes. And Viserys is like, slavery? Are you memeing me, my friend? Slavery's just a good old joke. Slavery? Love it. I wouldn't punish you for slavery if I was king. And so that's another important hint that someone says take a water break. That's a good idea. Give me a second. All right, we're lubricated. I think my APM was dropping there, but now we've got... All right, so we see Viserys is not a good fellow, and we also get hints of Jorah's murky past. So then we get a scene where Tyrion wakes up in the kennels after a hard night of drinking. In the books, he wakes up after a hard night of reading in the library. Bit different. And so we get an interaction between Prince Joffrey and his uncle, the Imp. And Tyrion slaps Joffrey for being awful. Because Joffrey is awful. Joffrey resists Tyrion's suggestion to, hey, go and give your sympathies to the Starks for the fall of Bran. Bran just got crippled, so Tyrion's like, do the right thing, and express your condolences. But Joffrey is a sociopathic little stain on the earth, and therefore he gets slapped. Which is not a relationship that Tyrion does well out of, the antagonism that grows here. And then the Hound, this dog who is the loyal, well, not very loyal, bodyguard of Joffrey, he says to Tyrion, I don't know if you should be slapping princes. And yeah, it really doesn't work out in the long run. We have a lovely mural here of the Stark direwolf in the breakfast den, where the Lannisters break their fast. And we got Myrcella here. Myrcella is one of the three children of Cersei and Jaime, who everyone thinks is actually Robert's child. But you know, Tyrion's very enthusiastic about breakfast, and Cersei is not very enthusiastic about Tyrion. And then we have an interesting comment from Jaime, where Jaime is like, T-Dog, whose side are you on? Because Tyrion asks some pointed questions about, like, so what actually happened with Bran? Are you saying it's a coincidence that the Lannisters came to Winterfell and then the same night, Bran falls from a tower? Is that a coincidence? Were you Lannisters responsible for this somehow? And Jaime's like, so whose side are you on? Are you loyal to the fam? Which is interesting because Tyrion's loyalty does indeed later change. Tyrion fights for Daenerys against the Lannisters. So the idea of Tyrion's loyalty being in question is important. And also we just get this frame, which might be the best frame of Game of Thrones. Take a moment with me to just bask in the glory of this frame. It's a goodie. Anyway, so then we get a scene where Cersei Lannister visits Catelyn, sitting by the bed of her crippled son Bran, and we get a really humanizing moment with Cersei where she describes her firstborn child with Robert. So Cersei's three children are actually secretly with her brother Jaime, except back in the day, she had a baby with Robert. So this was like a symbol of like maybe the relationship between Cersei and Robert actually could have gone well. But sadly, the child died of an illness. And Cersei talks very emotionally and tragically about the pain that she went through when her child died. And she also talked about how Robert, genuinely like got worked up and cared about this baby. So this was something that, could have been maybe. A black-haired boy. And it's also important because it tells us that children of Robert Baratheon have black hair, whereas incestuous children of Jaime and Cersei have blonde hair, which is the whole sort of main mystery of Season 1, the parentage of those children. And so Jon is preparing to join the Night's Watch. And he has a sword made before he goes. This sword is called Needle, or it's about to be called Needle, because he gives it to his favorite sister, Arya. I got to tell you, there's a lot of comments on a certain YouTube channel saying, "Oh, Needle is Valyrian steel." Needle's not Valyrian steel. We've seen it being made by Mikken, this just ordinary smith out of ordinary steel in Winterfell. But a lot of people are determined to believe that Needle is Valyrian steel. It would be cool if it was. But anyway, so Jon gets a sword made, but then he talks to Jaime Lannister. And Jaime Lannister is rude and arrogant to Jon, and he makes fun of him for joining the Night's Watch. And as Jon gradually learns, the Night's Watch is not the proud institution that it once was. It is an institution in decline. It's got less people. It's mostly made up of criminals who have nowhere else to go. It is not a very reputable place, and that's something that Jon grapples with. So Jaime is rude. Jaime's rude to a lot of people. Mikken, we just got this one great frame. Mikken has no lines, but he's there. Castle forged steel oyster. That's the phrase they use. Anyway, so then we got another direwolf doggo who looks a lot older than Summer, Bran's direwolf before, but we've got a lot of ear action here going on anyway, so that's fine with me. But then we have this sad farewell between Jon and Arya. Jon and Arya are like the two stark outsiders, because, you know, Arya as like a tomboy who doesn't fit into the female gender role, and Jon as a bastard. So they really relied on each other and loved each other, while they felt that no one else quite understood them in the Stark Winterfell family. And then Jon goes to farewell his brother, his cousin, Bran, because Bran is lying crippled, and Catelyn is nasty to Jon when he tries to say farewell to Bran. Catelyn, in fact, says, it should have been you. Catelyn very hatefully suggests that she would have rather Jon be crippled than Bran. And some people take that as evidence that Catelyn is like continually and consistently horrible and venomous to Jon, which I don't think is the case in either the show or the books. Catelyn certainly resents Jon, and Catelyn certainly didn't love Jon, but this outburst was, I think, meant to be an outlier. She wasn't normally so outwardly hateful, but yeah, she certainly wasn't warm. And anyway, so we have farewell between Jon and Ned, the man who he thinks is his father, and Ned promises that the next time we see each other, I'll tell you about your mother, because there's this whole mystery of who is Jon Snow's parents. And of course, tragically, Jon never sees Ned again. So Jon still doesn't know, even by the end of season 7, Jon still doesn't know who his parents are, and that's a mystery that starts all the way back in season 1. And then we have a little camp trip with the boys, quite a fruit platter that they've got there. I'm glad that Robert is so enthusiastic about fruit. Fruit's important. Fiber, get it in you. Vitamins. And anyway, so they're hanging out in the woods and they're having a good time. Robert has a piss on a tree, and they just talk about Robert's like, wasn't it great when we were young? Wasn't it great when we fought wars? And Ned's like, I don't know about the war thing. And then Robert gets really angry about Targaryens. Because Robert has found out that Daenerys is out there. And Ned says, well, you can't do anything about Daenerys. You can't do anything about that Targaryen. You can't get your hands on this one. And that is a low-key subtle reference that Jon is also a Targaryen, who Robert also can't get his hands on. So Ned is keeping a big secret from his friend. And then we go back to the Dothraki camp, and then we got some shots that I'm pretty sure I can't show on a live stream of Drogo raping Daenerys again. And Daenerys is very upset and horrified and traumatized by the whole situation. In the books, Daenerys considers committing suicide. Because she's so distraught at the treatment that she's suffering, physical and emotional, and it gets really fucking dark. But that relationship soon develops. And Daenerys also looks to her dragon eggs as a source of sort of power and resilience during the suffering that she experiences. And then Jon is traveling north, and main man Tyrion Lannister, the imp, is traveling with Jon. Because Tyrion's like, hey, I'm a rich party boy, why not go and piss off the edge of the world? Why not see one of the wonders of the world? The Wall. I mean, it's pretty cool. It's a fucking giant wall of ice. Like, how many of those have you seen? So Tyrion wants to go see it. And Jon is a bit bummed out because Jon is realizing that the Night's Watch that he's joining is made up of, like, criminals and disreputable people, and it's not quite the honorable brotherhood that he was expecting, and therefore he's a bit sad about it. But Tyrion gives him some sage advice, talks about mines and whetstones and such. Don't worry about it. And then we have Catelyn sitting by Bran, crippled. No one knows if he'll ever wake up again. And then someone comes to make sure that Bran never wakes up again. We have this assassin, the cat's paw, as everyone is so enthusiastic about calling him, with a Valyrian steel blade, who comes to kill Bran in the night. And Catelyn has to face off against this would-be assassin. And Catelyn fights to protect her child, gets her hands all sliced up, makes some finger sushi out of her, which is pretty rough. But ultimately, Bran is saved by his direwolf Summer, and that's the first of many times that the Stark direwolves protect their humans. So Bran lives. But that also creates another mystery of who sent the assassin. And in the show, They never really explain it. 7 seasons later, they still don't tell us who sent the knife after Bran. In the books, we actually learn that Joffrey sent it, which also sort of is its own can of worms that raises a lot of questions. But the point is that Bran survives an attempt on his life, and that makes the Starks even more terrified and paranoid of what's happening and other Lannisters doing this. So things get really scary. Someone says Bloodraven sent the assassin. Probably. Bloodraven did everything, right? And then we have Daenerys with her handmaidens, Doria, Irri, Jiqui. Jiqui just sort of disappears. I don't know why. She appears in a couple of episodes and then she's just gone. But Irri becomes a close friend and Doria becomes, a betrayer eventually. And they're talking about dragon eggs, and they're talking about dragons, and Jiqui's like, oh, dragons are all gone, man. Dragons ain't a thing. Those are just some pretty rocks that you got there. But we also get a story from Doria about how the supposed origin story of dragons. Supposedly, dragons first came from a second moon that was in the sky. The second moon got too close to the sun, the moon cracked open, and dragons poured out. And that's this sort of symbolic, mythical pattern that we see repeated throughout the story. The idea of a sun cracking and a moon cracking to expel fire. That's sort of what happens in the finale, but we'll get to that. Will we get to that? We'll try. And then Tyrion and Benjen and Jon arrive at the Wall, and the Wall is this amazing, giant testament to the power of H2O